بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولقد خلقنا الإنسان من سلالة من طين ثم جعلناه نطفة في قرار مكين ثم خلقنا النطفة علقة فخلقنا العلقة مضغة فخلقنا المضغة عظاما فكسونا العظام لحما ثم أنشأناه خلقا آخر فتبارك الله أحسن الخالقين. So my dear brothers and sisters and our dear friends, many times when people lose a child, the question that comes about at that time of great sorrow and sadness is, how do we do the burial procedures? Now, of course, if they die after having lived and they were a child or they were an adult, then there's always an understanding of how that's done, because that's the common way that we perform the various different rites for the deceased. However, the question that I want to deal with today is where it's a stillborn baby, or it's a baby that was born alive and then died all of a sudden, within a few minutes or within a few hours, or a miscarriage, a miscarried embryo. Limbs are formed, limbs are not formed. So to understand this, I want to explain two things first. If we have those in mind, inshallah, all of this will be very easy for us to understand. Because the time that this happens, generally people deal with it themselves. I've had so many fathers and mothers come to me at that time. They've just lost a child, an embryo, a miscarriage, and they're wondering how to deal with it. Early term, late term embryos. So how do we deal with this? Very simply put, number one, we're going to put those into three categories. And depending on the category, the rites will be performed accordingly. There could be up to 5 things that you'd have to do. Number 1 is the naming. Number 2 is the washing. Number 3 is the shrouding, the kafan, in the proper kafan procedure, the shroud procedure. 3 pieces for males and 5 pieces for females. And thereafter that there's the salatul janaza, the prayer. And then after that there's the burial. So those are generally the 5 rites that are performed on individuals, right? If an adult dies, the naming has already been done. That's why generally the naming you don't have to worry about. You only focus on the other 4. But when it's an infant or a miscarriage, then which of these 5 will apply? So again, let's categorize them into 3 types. The first type, in which all 5 rites will be performed, are those who are born alive. They're born alive and then they die. So they were not a stillbirth. They were actually born, they breathed, they cried, they made a sound, and then after that they died. Whether they died immediately, whether they died in a few minutes, in a few hours, in a few days. All of them will be treated as just a normal human being, and all 5 rites will be performed here. Thus, you need to give a name, right, to that child. You need to ghusl, bathe them. Number 3, you need to give them a kafan, a proper shroud. Shrouding rite, and then after that you pray salatul janaza on them, and then of course you bury them, right? In the graveyard. You can bury them wherever you have space to bury them. The second category then is where the child is born stillbirth, and they're not born alive at all. So in this case, you only have to perform 3 out of the 5 rites. You don't perform 2 of the rites. Simply put, you do not have to make the salat upon them, and you do not need a proper kafan for them. Otherwise, you name them, you wash them, and then you just wrap them in a cloth, and then you bury them. So you don't need a proper kafan, and there is no prayer upon them. Otherwise, you do the naming and everything else. In this second category is also the miscarriage, where the limbs are formed. So now the miscarriage, there's going to be those which are limbs are formed, and that's between 8 to 10 weeks and above, and then less than that. So anything from between 1 to about 7 weeks or so is going to be where the limbs are generally not formed. And after the 7th, the 8th, 9th, 10th week is when the limbs are formed. So as soon as the limbs are formed, they're going to be in the second category with the stillbirth. And hence, in that case, you do exactly what I explained before, which is that you don't have to pray upon them and you don't have to give them a proper shrouding. Otherwise, you wash them, you name them, you wash them, and then after that, you wrap them in a piece of cloth and then you bury them. A stillbirth or a miscarriage in which the limbs have formed, which is generally beyond 8 to 9 weeks. But you can always ask the midwives, etc., from your sound scans, ultrasound scans, you'll be able to know whether the limbs are formed or not anyway. Now, the third category then is where it's a very early term miscarriage. And a lot of the time the limbs, that's a case where the limbs have not formed. And if it's very early on, it could just be a clot. Whatever the case is, then in that case, there's obviously no name, there's no ghusl. It's just wrapped in a piece of cloth. Whatever you get, you can ask the hospital for it, you should, and you ask the hospital for that embryo, you wrap it up in a piece of cloth, and you just bury it. There's no naming, there's no ghusl, there's no salat upon that miscarriage as well. So inshallah, this should hopefully make it easy. The first category was the one where it was alive at birth, and the baby will in that case be given a name. Thereafter that, you'll have to do all the procedures, wash, kafan, shrouding, and thereafter the salat and the burial. The second category was when it was born not alive, so it's a stillbirth, or it's a miscarriage, late-term miscarriage after approximately 8, 9, 10 weeks where the limbs have formed. So the criteria is that have the limbs formed. So if the limbs have formed, then in that case, you have to give them a name, you wash them, and then after that, you just wrap them in a piece of cloth and you bury them, and there is no prayer. Now, the third one was where the limbs have not formed, so it's more early term, before 7 weeks. And in that case, there is the only things you have to do is you have to wrap it in a piece of cloth and you bury. There's no naming, there's no salat, and there's no washing either. If this has happened to you, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for you. It's not easy to lose a child at whatever stage, especially for the mothers and the fathers. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you with many other children, many other healthy children, and may Allah make this one that has just passed away a means to our entry into Jannatul Firdaus, inshaAllah. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.